You trained, you make your debut. I'd imagine you were nervous, or
Oh yeah,
yeah.
we had once again my buddy R.D. Swain and I we broke in as a tag team. We trained as a tag team. I don't know if anyone else has ever really. I've never heard of that. I've never heard of two guys or girls coming from whatever world they came into and train in wrestling as a tag team. So in at Valdosta State, our mascot or whatever you want to call it, we were the Valdosta State University Blazers. So when we started, we did kind of a football gimmick. We were football pants. We carried helmets to the ring, and we just wore the Blazers, which helped because in the territory of the Southeast, Valdosta State had built a good name by then as far as the Blazers, not just in football, but we had a great baseball, basketball program. So that name was kind of that brand was known. So that it was kind of like a no brainer for us to kind of come in with that. And then within the first few years, I realized that we were going to have, if we were going to really have an opportunity, we were have to go where the opportunity is, and that was Atlanta, Georgia, because that's where WCW was. And I told RD that I was like, hey, look, they're not going to come knock on our door in Valdosta, Georgia. We're going to have to go to them, I got my degree in teaching and education, and I was teaching school, wrestling on the weekends, and I applied, and I was very fortunate to get a teaching job in Marietta, Georgia. And I ended up moving. At the time, RD wasn't ready to make that move, and eventually he never did make the move, and it just made sense for us as friends and where our visions were that we kind of decided to separate and go and try, kind of work more singles. And we would occasionally come back as tag team. And then eventually RD, he got really great job. He started working for law enforcement there in Valdosta, which I think he's getting ready to retire right now, but he stayed with that. And so he eventually kind of phased out of wrestling and I stayed with it. But my big break took me almost 10 years. I mean, I broke it in April of 87. My big break didn't come to January of 96. I mean, literally almost 10 years later. So I was patient. I had to practice what I preach.
Yeah, I mean, you came in at a time when wrestling was really starting to take off in the 90s. It was the Monday
Yeah.
Night Wars,
Yep.
WCW, WWE. Monday Nitro had just got on the air on
Yep.
TNT. And
Yep.
so you came out as Glacier.
Yep.
Talk to me about who came up with the gimmick and character because it's very interesting.
Yeah, yeah, it was nothing like had been done like that at that time, and never even today. I mean, it's uh, the elaborate links that we went to do all that. It's here we are, almost 30 years later, and it still stands out as something pretty special. But man, my favorite saying, my favorite quote in the whole world, it was given to me by my college athletic trainer Jim Madaleno, and he goes, he remember him saying to me, he was Ray, I'm sure you've heard the saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? And I said, yes, yeah, of course I have. And he said, well, I think there's another part of that that makes it a whole lot more real and more true. And I was like, okay, what's that? He said, well, he goes, it's not necessarily, it's not always about who you know, or not, it's not always about what you know or who you know, but it's also about who's willing to say they know you, who's willing to put their name and reputation on the line for you to give you maybe an opportunity or give you a leg up. And I never forgot that. It just hit me and it stuck with me all those years. And once again, that's where I realized, okay, if I'm willing to do the work and I'm willing to concentrate on things I can control and really, really just work hard, people will see that, and people in the wrestling industry, like any other industry, they see that and they talk, And so when I moved to Atlanta in 1990, one of my other one of the strongest forces in my life is a gentleman named Chip Smith. I met Chip when I was a teenager in Brunswick, and Chip has gone on to be one of the top sports performance trainers in the world. He's got a legendary career built mainly around doing NFL combine training, and he's trained Hall of Famers like Brian Urlacher, Champ Bailey, to Jalen Hurts. He trained Jalen a few years ago. I mean, he's trained that level of people, and he was the one that taught me that you got to concentrate on what you can control. Because the other stuff will you'll drive you nuts if you let it. The stuff you can't control. But Chip had a Gold's Gym in Atlanta. He sold that to Lex Luger and Sting, and they rebranded it Main Event Fitness, and they moved it to Marietta, Georgia. They had two locations. They shut one down, but they moved. They concentrated on the Marietta, Georgia one. So when I moved to Atlanta, that was already in place. So obviously, I was smart enough to go join Main Event Fitness as soon as I got to Marietta, Georgia, and then and through the indie circuit, I was building a really good name and reputation on the indie circuit. And I got to know all the guys, especially one being Diamond Dallas Page. And back then, Dallas was still coming up. He was still trying to, he was fighting to be noticed, in the early '90s. And but Dallas made a lot of tracks, for his because of his hard work and work ethic. And so as that happened, our friendship strengthened. I would always ask him like, hey, like, how can I get in front of Bischoff, Eric Bischoff, because that Eric was the head of the company. Him and Dallas were great friends. They literally lived about 3 or 4 houses down from each other. I would always be over at Dallas's house, so watching tapes and everything. And it was one of those things where it was a timing thing. And then eventually, Dallas and I, '95, Christmas of '95, we were Christmas shopping together. And I'd realized that I had never really talked to him about my martial arts background. So we're eating lunch and at a pizza place. And I said, Dallas, I'm thinking about putting some of my martial arts into my wrestling gimmick. And I never forget what he said. He had a slice of pizza and he was like, well, bro, that'd be great if you knew some of that stuff. And I was like, what do you mean? And then I realized I had never really talked to him that much about it. And when I gave him all the background about all of it, he's like, bro, like I didn't know any of that. Eric's into all that. And so he went back and told all that to Eric. And that's what piqued Eric's interest. I had actually had a couple impromptu meetings with Eric. Like Dallas used to have these legendary Christmas parties, and I had talked to Eric at the parties and stuff, but nothing ever really came of it. And so once Eric heard that, he said, I want to meet with him after the Christmas break. So it came like the first week of January of '96. And I literally met him at a little restaurant right there in their neighborhood. I think it was maybe like a Longhorn restaurant or something like that, but we met kind of in the back. I went in thinking it was just going to be, a dinner to kind of talk to Eric, kind of like informally. And long story short, we met for what I remember to be almost 3 hours. And, from beginning to end, because we talked about all the martial arts stuff and the people we kind of, both knew of and just the circles of that we ran in, and the people we knew. And I had a really great conversation with him. And then at the end of that conversation, he said, I want to sign you to a deal with WCW. And obviously, I'm giving you the very abbreviated version of all that night. And at the time, I had gone to work for Chip Smith. Chip was the athletic director of the Atlanta Athletic Club, which is still to this day one of the most prestigious country clubs in America. And I was the fitness director under Chip. And so I had a really good job. And so when the opportunity came, I told him, I said, well, I can't just leave this job right now. I said, I definitely, I'm on board, but, what kind of game plan can we get? And he said, do this. So I don't, I'm not asking you to quit your job just yet. He goes, but I just wanted to get you signed to a deal. He goes, and he asked me, he said, are you still wrestling on the independent wrestling scene? I said, yes, sir, I am. And he said, well, here's what I want you to do. He said, I want you to call and cancel whatever bookings you have. And I just want you to just completely disappear from the independent wrestling scene and don't explain to anybody, just disappear for a while. And I looked right at him and I said, I could do that. And so, but through that, the way that everything got started, as far as actually us constructing and putting everything, as I always say, from on the drawing board to finished product, was I had worked on, I'd gotten into training as an actor, taking on camera film classes, acting classes, and through that, I worked on a couple, low budget independent films that were just, like in very small roles and stuff. I ended up meeting a young man named Andre Frides who had a special effects studio called AFX Studios. And once again, it's who's one to say they know you. I said to Eric, hey, I got this guy who's a really talented, special effects guy, and he can make costumes and he can do everything, and he does it for TV and film. He may be the guy who can help us, put all this, bring this to life. So they met. He ended up hiring Andre through WCW to create from finished, what I call drawing board to finished product, the whole persona of Glacier. And then, of course, he went on to do the whole persona for Mortis, then for Wrath, and then for Ernest the Cat Miller. So Andre played a really big part in all of that. And I tell you, Andre went on to get tons and tons of work out of that through WCW and then WWE. His name and reputation in studio has grown so much. I mean, he works on tons and tons of major film projects. Because everything films in Atlanta now, or at least a lot films in Atlanta. So anyway, so it's funny. I mean, just through relationships and I was able to make that introduction. And at that time, no one in wrestling ever had a special effects studio come in and design their gimmick. I mean, it was all upon the wrestler to do it, and it pretty much that kind of came across on camera. I mean, Flair had his robes and stuff like that, but that was about as much of a spectacle as and Sting would wear kind of his stuff but even that was stuff that was kind of made by seamstresses and stuff. It wasn't anything that was an elaborate look. So yeah, that was kind of how it all started, and it was a long process back and forth to kind of mold it from literally just an idea. And obviously we played off of, as wrestling does. Wrestling always plays off what's popular in culture and society and culture. And of course, the Mortal Kombat video game had been unbelievably popular. I think at this time the movie had come out, and that's really what I found later was that the Midway company, who owned the rights to all the Mortal Kombat stuff, they were talking to TBS about bringing a TV series to life. And that's what happened was, if you remember, Mortal Kombat TV series aired on TNT. So that's kind of how it all started. I know that was a very long-winded answer, so I apologize. But
No, it's fine. It's good. The best wrestling gimmicks I feel are ones that are a view with the volume turned up. And
yeah,
with your background, martial arts, karate, combined with some of the more video game-esque
yeah,
kind of content that was huge and popular, uh, definitely
yeah. Well,
worked
it's
out.
funny. It's what I always tell aspiring young wrestlers, because that's what I do a lot. Is I help with a lot of them, explaining them how do you create a gimmick. And I don't like to use the word character that it seems to be used a lot in wrestling now, and I get it, I understand, but to me, it's more of a persona. And like you said, like I was very fortunate to get mentored by some of the very best in the history of this business. But and I was always of that same school of thought. Is to me, the ones who seem to be the most believable, relatable, memorable were the ones who that just seemed like their personality got turned up when they were in front of the wrestling audience. And that's kind of who they were when I would meet them, even as a wrestler. It just volume would kind of be turned back down some. A perfect example would be like Dusty Rhodes. And but what I always say is, the great thing about when you're creating your persona in the world of professional wrestling, you have three options. Your persona can be 100% factual. It can be your real life, everything from your real life. You can just be that person with the volume turned up, or it can be 100% fictional. You can make it all up, and and it can be a layer of your personality that's already there, but you just haven't shown the world yet. And that happens a lot in wrestling. That's what I think the beauty of wrestling is. It allows people to kind of show another layer of their personality that they probably wouldn't show anywhere else. But also, it can be a combination of the two. It can be some factual and some fictional, and you mold those together, which is how the persona of Glacier came to be. Bischoff really liked the part of the story of my family history of law enforcement. My parents, my twin brother, my two uncles, they were all in law enforcement. So he liked that. He wanted to keep that part of my story and in my martial arts training. But then we kind of wove in some stuff about me traveling to Japan and training under this old master and getting this helmet. And so a lot of that stuff was kind of, we kind of pulled that into some of the fictional stuff and factual stuff, molded together to create the persona of Glacier. And then what I realized along the way was the person that the Glacier would become is someone who's very stoic, very super focused, very determined, martial arts warrior type of wrestler, and he's someone who never smiles. Because he's intensely focused, not because he's a jerk. He's very focused on what the task is at hand, which is getting to the ring and beating the opponent, whoever that is. Ray Lloyd is the guy who smiles all the time and laughs all the time. Glacier never smiles, but because he's intensely focused and very, very determined to do whatever he's going to do. And that's who I was as a competitor, as a football player, as a martial artist. So I just took that layer and just kind of made that more visible, to the wrestling world.
Yeah, you have to really get into character and be in that
Yeah,
mode when you're on. When
right,
that red light is
right.
on, you have to. And then when you're off, you know, you can be yourself. And
Yeah, and
so
that's what I tell people all the time, that we are different to our fans. We are different than just actors playing a character. Tom Cruise, can play Pete Maverick of Top Gun, and but when someone meets Tom Cruise, they know they're meeting Tom Cruise, and they want to meet Tom Cruise. when wrestling fans meet us, I promise you, because I know for a fact there's not any wrestling fans out there that care to meet Ray Lloyd. They don't. Ray Lloyd to them is very boring. When they meet me, they want to have an experience with Glacier, not Ray Lloyd, who may be worried about paying all my bills for this month and doing they got to go home and cut the grass and do all that stuff. They want to have an experience with Glacier, that persona that I project to the wrestling world. And it's very important that wrestlers understand those that you have two layers of your personality and which ones the wrestling fan wants to have an experience with if you get a chance to interact with them. And that's the difference between wrestlers, in my opinion, wrestlers and actors, TV and film actors, is that they play a character and then they put that character on the shelf. And for us, it's a lot deeper than a character. Like I said, it's another layer of our personality, a persona, so that when we do meet the wrestling fan, the that shows through. We're able to kind of turn that switch on, but seamlessly to them, so that we give them the experience that they want, which is with that person that they see when they watch wrestling.
Do you feel it's harder now with the advent of the internet and social media to have a character that you can be deemed as like real to the fan? Do you feel it's
I do. I think it's harder, but I think a lot of people they set themselves up and they make it harder on themselves because uh, you know if especially if you have a wrestling persona that's one that is uh, radically different than just who you are as a person when you're not in that mindset. I always feel like it's fun, for the audience to see maybe something kind of halfway in the middle of that, and just like I just because I idolized Dusty growing up. Evil Knievel and Dusty Rhodes were my two childhood heroes, and I got to know Dusty and really work with him and get to know him on a personal level. And Dusty to me was a great example. Like if you ever met Dusty and he would just talk regular, he talked like you would think he would as Dusty Rhodes. But if he had to do a promo or he had to step in front of the wrestling world, you know that like the volume just got turned up. So you still got to see that. But if you happen to meet him, if you somehow met him somewhere outside of the wrestling world, you were still going to get you're going to meet that persona of Dusty Rhodes because he was just going the volume was just going to get adjusted some.
Mhm.
And I feel like when people do interviews that are active right now, you're on TV right now, people are watching you, people are paying to see you. I feel like when they do, first of all, I just feel like a lot of people, like I said, if they have an elaborate gimmick to where their persona in wrestling is radically different than who they are, it's a tricky balance. It's a tricky balance because if you are going to show that other side of you, then just realize the world's going to see that, and that may make it harder for people to be able to suspend disbelief and
Mhm.
allow them to buy into your wrestling persona. So yeah, it's a little bit of a slippery slope. Definitely that was not there, back when I was coming up with the internet and stuff was not around. So it was a lot easier to be able to portray that persona, to the fan.
Mhm.